So without further delay, I'd like to welcome Bradley Katcher and Alex Gromadzki. Bradley, we'll get started with you if you don't mind. Could you start by introducing yourself and giving us a little skim of your resume, including an overview of your time at UVA, your current role, and how you got into data science?
Yeah, for sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Bradley Katcher. I currently work at the Federal Reserve in a research position. I obviously went to UVA, so I did my undergrad there in econ, graduated back in 2018. Concurrently with that, I did the accelerated master's in public policy in the Batten School. Really loved both of those programs, thought they gave me a really good foundational basis in economic skills and kind of applying them to real world problems, and ultimately wanted to further expand how I used and worked with data. So I went to the master's in data science program and graduated there this past May. So that's kind of my background at UVA. I was involved in some different student activities, like the student council, like the Alfred Marshall Society with the Econ Department, Charlottesville Debate League, and a couple other organizations. I also worked as a research assistant with a couple of professors in the Batten School. So currently I work at the Federal Reserve. My role there is mainly a research-oriented role, but our time is split between policy work and research. And now the interesting thing about this role is that we work with massive amounts of data. And so that's where my data science skills come into play. So specifically, kind of on a daily basis, I work with the universe of credit score data. So regularly download in, 1 billion plus observations, working with that in order to inform research as well as to provide materials to the Board of Governors. So kind of working with big data has been a really quintessential part of my early career. And kind of how I got interested in data science.
Great, thank you so much. We'll definitely come back and touch on a lot of the things you mentioned. Alex, could you give us a skim of your resume and your time at UVA and current role?
Yeah, definitely. So I, like Bradley, graduated in 2018 with econ. I actually didn't have a whole lot of like quantitative heavy econ in my coursework. I had the basic like econometrics, you need stats, all that. But I knew that I was interested in adding more. And so that's where some CS classes and then eventually the Data Science Institute came in. And so I really beefed up that side of my skill set at the DSI rather than actually in the econ program. I think the two go really nicely hand in hand though, because you do get that that theory side if you're not focused on, oh, I need to be coding the whole time in your econ major. Within the School of Data Science, my capstone was focused on more operational data, which was interesting. I'm not actually using that same area in my professional work as much. One of the cool things about data science is you can sort of jump between different areas, and this like tool set is still going to be relevant. So with what I'm doing right now at Guidehouse, I'm looking at a bunch of my client who's it's Office of the Chief Financial Officer. So they're doing audits and things. And so I'm looking at different sorts of problems they have, whether that's being like fraud detection, or if they just need to automate a review process and trying to use huge amounts of data that they can't actually manually process and get through that quicker, whether that's with machine learning or just some quick programming. But yeah, and at UVA, I was heavily involved in the Virginia Gentleman, took a bunch of my time and definitely fun, even though it's not data, got to have some variety in there. But yeah, that's me.
Great, thank you. So Alex kind of started touching on this, but some of the data skills that you developed later through the DSI, could you guys both touch on a little more about what technical skills you've needed in your current roles as well as in your past roles?
Sure, I'm happy to kick this off. So I would say kind of the general ability to code, I think is something that's really important and used throughout. So specifically, we do a lot of coding in Stata and R. So I think that learning an object-oriented programming language, be it R, be it Python, be it something similar, is really helpful in working with data just broadly and generally, and something that I do on a daily basis. So, I'll always have R or Stata or something else fired up when I'm working with data. So really the quintessential skills of kind of working with data, being able to clean it. Fortunately or unfortunately, the majority of your time working with data is spent cleaning data and preparing it for analysis. But then being able to, kind of know the technical skills in terms of different approaches, be it, machine learning algorithms, be it various, different kinds of approaches in order to dealing with data, regression, your core econometric skills, but then also going beyond that and learning, different techniques. I would say kind of the most important thing is to be able to take a data set and use a coding language to prepare it for analysis, and then kind of a good understanding of the right analysis to run that will give you a meaningful result to a question. So not just, hey, I did all these different analyses, but what is the question I'm really trying to answer? And being able to learn what skills I need to, and what tools I need to apply in order to get me an answer to that question.
Yeah, I definitely echo the data cleaning sentiment. I think the vast majority, at least of how I spend my, or I find myself spending my time, is cleaning data. And so if you can find a way to consistent, like programming, I use Python mostly, but any preferred programming language, assuming you're allowed to use it, will work. Find a way to consistently clean your data so you can just run a program, and that'll make your life so much easier. Really, depending on like the use case, you're still going to have to clean your data. It doesn't matter if you're modeling or you're just trying to do exploration. You're always going to have to clean your data, and so having that programming skill set is tremendously helpful in doing that.
Great. So you guys talked about like the technical skills you needed. So what else should students be doing right now to gain entry into the field? And were there any clubs that you were involved with at UVA or any resources you took advantage of during your time here that have since benefited you in the job search or in your current roles?
I'm not sure if there were any clubs that I was, and like I mentioned before, it was mostly singing for the extracurriculars for me. What can you repeat the first part of the question there?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like what students should be doing right now to gain entry into the field.
Yeah, I would say probably one, learning a programming language if you don't already. It doesn't have to be one in particular. Eventually, I think with econometrics, you'll be exposed to Stata, but also learning SQL, learning how to query a database. I think that will help you a lot. Being familiar with manipulating that data, depending on your proficiency already, you might look at doing like some Kaggle competitions. If you're not familiar with it, Kaggle is a website that has free data sets that you can go and use with an objective. And so you can go and download these and also look at what other users are doing. And so that's a good way in a low stakes environment to try and own your data skills.
Yeah, I second exactly what Alex said in terms of just using those coding skills, as well as to learn SQL and learn how to use databases. The majority of data is stored in kind of this infrastructure. So being able to just develop those fundamental skills, I think, are helpful. Also, another piece of advice I would have is in your coursework. So see if you can integrate some quantitative analysis into your papers or projects or anything. You're writing a paper, hey, maybe download some census data from IPUMS and run some analysis and use that to supplement it. Not only will that benefit you in like your own coursework and performance there, a lot of employers will ask to see some projects or like to walk through kind of a quantitative analysis you've done during interviews. And I think that that's super helpful. And then also it's just good exposure to the different tools that are out there, as well as the free data resources that are out there. Lastly, in terms of clubs, I would say one that I was tangentially involved in was called Code for Charlottesville. So there are a lot of different branches of this organization called Code for America that are out there in the country. And basically it's trying to do community-oriented service with data. And so specifically, we worked with the Virginia Department of Labor wage theft data in order to kind of do some analysis and understand what are some trends and patterns going on with potential wage theft. And so that was kind of an interesting way to get involved and apply these data skills in a real world context.
Great, thank you both. That was so helpful. So Bradley started to touch on kind of like leveraging your coursework and involving projects and quantitative analysis in your coursework. Could you guys both talk a little bit more about how you leveraged your economics degrees as an asset when applying for jobs? And then also, you both have incredibly impressive educational histories with multiple degrees from UVA. Can you talk to us about kind of like why you decided to pursue those degrees and how those degrees have helped you as well?
Yeah, sure. So specifically, the first part of the question was, can you remind me, Chloe, what the first part was?
Yeah, sorry about that. That was a long question. The first part was more specifically about your economics degree and how you leverage that in the job search.
Yeah. So when I was applying for jobs, I applied for some research-oriented jobs, like at universities and at the Fed, where I currently am, as well as some jobs in the private sector. So like I applied to, for example, Fannie Mae's rotational program. And one thing that they were specifically asking about was kind of my experience in economics and a understanding of key economic like ideas and indicators, as well as understanding of concepts like trade-offs, like kind of that whole background that the economics department teaches you, kind of the theory and background of incentives, how humans interact. And they ask, specific questions about, hey, like something about mortgages that I didn't really understand or know of beforehand. But I was able to walk through with the kind of general framework of economics, saying, okay, I understand the interaction between markets, supply and demand, and incentives, and kind of walking through what the econ department taught me. I was able to answer those kind of questions. Additionally, they, like in that specific role, asked about like differences in difference estimators. So like key things that I had learned in econometrics came up in these kind of interviews. So I would say, like the key concepts from econometrics, as well as like the general principles of economics were super helpful kind of in my job search process, as well as just like throughout my career so far. The second part of your question was about the educational background and why I chose to do that. So I really loved economics. I thought that, I was really interested in it. I was interested in some real world applications of it. And I thought that would be in the policy arena, which is why I chose to do the Master's in Public Policy and kind of wanting to apply these economic skills to a policy context. From there, well, I thought those programs really helped me if I wanted to be, a policy analyst. And I think the econ department does a really good job of teaching you the fundamental skills and concepts in economics. I knew that the world is trending towards more and more data and bigger data sources, and we're going to need more skills to apply to those data sets in order to be effective. And so that's kind of what led me to the data science program.
Yeah, similar to Bradley. I don't know if it was like a single specific, like, oh, this one like piece of like economics, like technical knowledge really helped, but something like opportunity cost when dealing with trade-offs of like implementing a model. It's not like you just sit down and you're like, I want that, and it's done. You have to spend time on it. And in an interview, they're going to try and assess that probably. It's not going to be, let me throw the most complicated tools at a problem that just requires like ordinary least squares to solve it. And so having that awareness and being able to explain to them, here's like the trade-offs of implementing these models is something that, while not necessarily like at the forefront of my mind, like, boom, this is trade-offs, opportunity cost, look at like long run benefits and like costs, all that. That's just knowledge that's in the back of my head on how I want to frame like the approach and obviously the end goal. The second part of the question was what again? Sorry.
It was about why you decided to pursue a degree in data science.
Yeah, so I alluded to this a little bit before. I took a lot of classes that were not quantitative heavy in the econ department. Part of that, I was really interested in the different topics, which don't necessarily get super mathematical. The other part of it was a lot of analysis that's like traditional economics, I think, is like very heavy, like stats or calc based. Obviously, data science relies a lot on those backgrounds, but I think it also allows some more flexibility in the solutions. It's not necessarily something like, oh, I have to be significant at a 0.95 level. Like, you don't see that on a daily basis. I think more often someone's interested when you're talking like data science with the result, like, was I able to successfully predict this or that? And they're not as concerned with, well, was it statistically significant on this or that level? And that sort of flexibility and the new different sorts of techniques were like from those classes at the DSI. And so that's what I was interested in learning, be able to be more creative with sort of the solutions in my work.
Chloe, I have a question I'd like to jump in just to piggyback on those answers. Okay, thanks. So you all have talked about some of the organizations that you, well, your own organization, but you talked, Bradley, a little bit about Fannie Mae, where you went to work, where you interviewed. Can you talk a little bit? I have two questions, but I'm only going to ask one at first. Where you also considered working and where you did end up and what those interview processes were like. How did the organizations assess that you had the skills that you needed to do the job?
Yeah, I'm happy to start on this. So I, as I mentioned earlier, applied to some research-oriented jobs as well as some government-oriented jobs and private sector jobs. I would say that specifically the research jobs, for example. So I applied to the Fed, I applied to a few other government offices that primarily focused on research, as well as, for example, the Opportunity Insights Lab, which is a research lab up at Harvard. And they were very keen on knowing my coding ability. And so, for example, at the Fed interview, it was a lot of, hey, talk me through how you would do this kind of analysis. Or if you were presented with this question, what would your approach be? If you encountered a coding error, how would you handle it? With the Opportunity Insights Lab, they actually sent me a data test to complete. So basically, they gave us 48 hours to go through, they gave us a data set and produce, and basically run an analysis and summarize the results to them. So I think those were two pretty good indications. In most of the other private sector jobs and interviews I had, there were a lot of like technical questions, which mostly were about like general mathematical ability and kind of ability to express trade-offs, kind of exactly what Alex was saying, think through opportunity costs, think through why you're going to make this kind of decision rather than that. So I would say, aside from like basic mathematical skills, the concepts that you learn in those econ classes were very helpful in order to be able to answer those questions.
Yeah, and I applied to a wide variety. Like I was saying with the domains, I applied to anything that sounded like it met both my interest for the domain, but then just the technical skill set. So I wasn't interested in some of the positions that were like more Excel heavy. I knew that I wanted to do something that required more of that like advanced tool set. And so I applied to everything from like entertainment companies through to like consulting, which is where I am now. I would say of the interviews I had, the vast majority would be a first round like behavioral interview, just mostly the recruiter making sure that you're a good fit for the company. From there, some sort of technical review. I had one like longer interview process that they sent me a Kaggle competition actually, and they were saying, okay, you've got 2 weeks, pretend this is like your actual job as much as you can. You're gonna be briefing this to your like client. I've also had coding challenges that were 30 minutes where it said sign in and go, and that was like all SQL. And it said just do as much SQL as you can for each of these different tasks. After that, there's in person, or what I assume will be now like video calls with actual data scientists on the team talking about their work. And then that's when, for me, they got like the feel of whether or not you could go beyond just applying a model. And it would be like, do they have the intuition where if I throw a problem at them right now, they could walk me through sort of that mindset. But yeah, the vast majority, I would say, probably have that same sort of structure where you start off with behavioral and then you get slowly more technical as you go.
Chloe, should I ask my second question? That sound good? Okay, great, thanks. So my second question, I'm not sure that you can answer this, but I'm curious for students or anyone on the line who is not planning to go get an advanced degree right away in data science, and you already recommended some classes, what types of jobs should they look for? They're interested in data jobs, but they're not going to have the advanced skills that you do. Where might they start?
I think a good place to start is a lot of places have kind of rotational skills programs. So when I was applying, basically it could be like 2 years and you would do 6 months in four different departments. And kind of during that time, you would get exposed to a wide variety of different skill sets and different experiences, as well as pick up those important skills along the way. So for example, I interned at Visa, credit card company, and they had this program that basically it was designed specifically for people who did not have advanced degrees. So I actually tried to apply to it and they said, sorry, you're ineligible when it came around my time. Mm-hmm. So basically what it was is it took you through different parts of the company and gave you different flavors of what that work was like, as well as gave you the opportunity to kind of, you're not there for so long that if you really don't like it, it's not something that you're like bound into. But it's a good opportunity for you to be able to go ahead and get exposed to a lot.
Thank you. Alex, do you have anything to add? Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't know if I've got any other recommendations. I know there's also, there's tons of, you mentioned coursework. There's definitely like opportunities where you can go and take either like stuff online, or you can do training programs through probably work. So even if you're in a role that you have that's not as technical, if you express that interest, hopefully your employer would be able to work with you to say, here's where I am and here's where I would like to go, and see if they have a way to help you build that skill set, or at least to see if that's an area that you're interested in pursuing.
Something that our UVA students have access to right now is Coursera. They are eligible to take any Coursera course, whether it's SQL or Python or business writing, for free until December 31st. And maybe that will be extended, but that's exciting for everyone on the line. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, Jen. So I'll jump back to your current jobs. Could you guys tell us a little bit more? You kind of went through your day-to-day, but could you tell us about a project you've enjoyed? And with that, maybe some of like the challenges and more rewarding parts of your current roles?
Yeah, I would say that kind of an interesting project was, so effectively, the way the Federal Reserve operates is there are Federal Open Market Committee meetings every 6 weeks. And so when we're not preparing for that, that's kind of our time to do research. But occasionally we get interrupted with a question from the governors or from a member of Congress and say, hey, we want to know more about this topic. So we got one of those questions where it said, hey, we know that consumer credit has dropped over time. People, due to COVID, people aren't borrowing as much, they aren't spending as much, but we've seen these auto sales really, really tick up. Can you do some investigation into that? And so that was kind of an interesting project where they said, okay, we see this trend happening, let's see what different kind of angles we can approach it from. So we have a lot of different data sets. One I mentioned was like the credit score data set. We also have data sets on auto loan securitizations. And basically what I got to do was kind of start talking to people who were familiar with this topic and figuring out what data sets were available and then how to tackle this problem. So it was really cool to be able to learn what kind of data was out there, be able to try different approaches, present it to my boss and say, hey, I think we should go this way, and him giving me feedback and like figuring out how to best frame this response, and then write a memo that was used, presumably went to a policymaker. And I think that the policy relevance of that was really cool for me, someone who's interested in policy, but hey, I'm tackling a real world problem that's actually an issue that the economy is facing right now.
Yeah, so in terms of different projects, I have sort of had little small efforts that go on throughout because my client just has a million different priorities where they're like, oh, we want this, this, this. And so I've been juggling a bunch of, like I said, smaller tasks. I would say one of the more interesting ones is pertaining to their fleet cards. So with every government vehicle in the department, they have a credit card that's associated with it. And so they're trying to track the different fuel usage and make sure that the cards are being used for what they're supposed to. And so with that, they have a huge data set where it tracks things like the distance that's attributed to a vehicle on the odometer, or different like actual manual inputs from employees. On top of that, they don't want someone to go over their purchasing limit. So if someone is only allowed to spend $2,500 on their vehicle in a month, that's one thing. But there's also split purchases where someone on a single transaction is not allowed to spend above a certain amount. And so what was really difficult for people to manually do is go through and check all the different transactions. Does one look like it's within the same date with the same merchant? So whoever they're getting a repair or fuel. And I was able to go and actually combine those two sorts of ideas to say, okay, well, this person's not driving that much, and they also have a bunch of repairs, or they have really high fuel costs. Something like that, where it wasn't necessarily all rules-based to start with. I got to use a little bit of machine learning to say, okay, what do these variables seem to indicate? What is strange? And from there can go and sort of target what actually gets audited. So that hopefully, if there is fraud, they can detect it soon, rather than waiting and realizing later that they've accrued a ton of charges.
Thank you. Jen, have we gotten any questions in from students yet? Yeah.
Unmuted myself. We don't have anything yet, but it is now time. We can tell everyone that if they want to send their questions, this is a great time. They can unmute themselves if they'd like, and just let us know they want to ask themselves, or they can send it to me through the chat. I would love to hear the follow-up, though, the second part of your question, Chloe, about what Bradley and Alex really enjoy about their work. What are some challenging areas? Maybe something that was unexpected when you came into the job that you learned later.
I'll say just kind of like on a, not so much like actual work content, but one thing is we're all working virtually now, as you guys are all familiar with. And I think that was really weird, starting a new job in a virtual environment. And I think that that's kind of been a challenge because I've never met any of my coworkers in person. So kind of gauging their responses, like learning, who is super energetic and likes to like be really involved in a project, who just wants occasional updates. There's no more opportunity of us kind of going together to a whiteboard and writing things out and solving, different ideas together. We've tried to recreate that as much as possible. But I think working in the COVID environment has just been a challenge, especially meeting new people. I think, though, that one of the things I enjoy the most is that I, as a research assistant, have entered in a cohort with a lot of other research assistants. And so I've met some really cool, interesting people my age who also entered in this virtual work environment. And so we try to get together at least once a week for kind of like a virtual water cooler, and kind of working, interacting, and meeting these new people and learning from them has been incredible. So one thing that they do for the research assistants is have a research assistant workshop. So what this is it's an opportunity where we can present to each other. So for example, someone gave a presentation on the applications of engineering concepts to economics. And so that was super cool, an opportunity to learn and interact with people from like my peers, even in this virtual environment. The other cool thing is that the Fed has seminars from economists throughout the entire world every day, at least one or two. So I think earlier this morning, there was a seminar on using natural language processing in order to understand financial crisis talk. So when central banks or news organizations are putting out articles, doing sentiment analysis and natural language processing in order to do something. And there's a seminar in the afternoon too. So like every day, there are so many cool, interesting opportunities to learn new things. And I really love that.
So someone who really likes the academic environment, who's always interested in this kind of academic learning, it might be a good fit for them to work for the Fed or a research institute, think tank, that sort of an organization. Does that sound right?
I would say, yeah, that's definitely the case. I loved like school and learning and thought I might want to get a PhD. So that's kind of why I chose the Fed. I'm less and less inclined these days to get a PhD. And that being said, I don't think that the Fed was a bad place for that. So in terms of people, the research assistant position is a 2-year position. And the majority of people actually don't go on to get PhDs. Some of them go to get advanced degrees. Some of them go into consulting. Some of them go into banking. Kind of the nice thing about the Fed specifically is that this program is 2 years where I can learn and build a lot of skills and do some interesting work. But then kind of my opportunities to go different places are definitely pretty wide open.
Thank you.
So I'll sort of go two ways, because with consulting, you've got your company and then your client. In terms of challenges, it's sort of like a running joke where it's like what your client wants, what your boss wants, what you think like they want, and then what you actually like do. That pipeline of like, or the game of telephone basically, is something that I knew to expect, but I didn't know necessarily to what degree. And it's definitely there. When a client tells like management, oh, like we want this or that to be built, and then I get relayed that from them, and I go and I have my own interpretation of like, oh, here's what I think they want. There's a lot of back and forth where stuff is not necessarily from the ideation to the execution perfect. So there's a lot of iteration with, oh, well, I want this slight thing tweaked, and then realizing, oh, well, that makes all these other things change. It definitely is a longer process to get something done when you have all these different stakeholders, because everyone wants something to be done a very precise way. That being said, it is super satisfying when someone says, oh, this is like what I've been asking for years and like haven't been able to get. Having something, even if it's simple, like a dashboard as the end result, where someone can go and look at it and say, oh, like all of that like boils down to where I can just see here clearly whatever I've been looking for. That's an awesome feeling to make all those ends meet. On the like company side, on the Guidehouse side, one of the cool things is there's a lot of leadership opportunities because it is a younger company. Guidehouse was PwC's public sector like 2 years or so ago, before it got bought by a venture capital group, and then it merged with Navigant. So now we've got both strong public and private side. With that though, because it's young, I've had like the opportunity to lead a thought leadership group, which is basically putting together different, like whether that's papers or sorts of like data products where we can go and try to both brand Guidehouse and also learn the most recent technologies along the way, so that we're writing about what we can offer our clients while at the same time making sure we're all caught up on the most recent methodologies. So that's been cool, being part of a large company, but a new company.
So to follow up on that, a question did come in, and you've answered it for the most part, but I want to give you an opportunity to answer exactly the question as it was asked, to talk a little bit about the culture of each of your firms or each of your organizations in the case of the Fed. So, and this may be difficult because everyone for the most part is working from home right now. But if you have anything to add about culture, please share with us.
I would say one thing about the Fed is that, as I've experienced it so far, it's a very, very relaxed culture. One thing that I was really important to me when I was looking for jobs is to have that regular 9-to-5 job, where you're not expected to be on weekends, to work late nights. And that's one thing that I found. I found an incredibly supportive environment where, hey, right now there are a lot of people working with kids. So, I mean, some people are on points of the day, off at points of the day. We have so much flexibility to design our schedule, as long as we're, basically doing the necessary outputs and completing all of our work. We have so much flexibility to do our 40 hours when we want to do them, and kind of that whole environment, which I think is phenomenal and something that I really, really enjoy. Also, it's a really supportive and, encouraging environment. I feel like there's a lot of opportunities to interact and learn from new people, and not very much competition in terms of, you're rewarded for putting in more than what's expected of you, but you're very much not expected to, which I don't know, that didn't come off very well. But I think that it's a very good environment in that there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of very good work-life balance.
Yeah, and to sort of echo the adjustments with COVID, I at least have found most of the people I've talked with, companies seem to be pretty reasonable in terms of adjusting and understanding that people, if they've got kids, they can't necessarily just do the standard 9-to-5. They've been really flexible with it at Guidehouse, trying to make sure they support everyone as best they can. I would say, yeah, Guidehouse is not laid off anybody since COVID. So they definitely care about their employees from the top down. And that's something that they make sure that everyone knows. When we have a meeting, it's hey, we're still, even if we're going to take a bit of a hit because people are on overhead, they don't want to let people go during these tough times. So it's been a pretty supportive culture. In terms of working over your 40 hours, there's sort of the idea where often government consultants, you mirror their hours more. I would say it really depends on your client and sometimes the deliverables. If you don't need to put in more than 40 hours, I don't think that you're going to be asked oh, do this extra thing for your client, spend 60 hours this week. That's just not going to happen. Alternatively, if you've got something huge and there's something there's a bug that goes wrong, you might put in 45, 50 hour week. Same thing really with any sort of work outside of what your client, your main project is. For any of the thought leadership stuff, or if you work on any proposals, that's often outside of your normal 40-hour week. That being said, they're encouraging of people to not be crazy with it. They don't want you to work a 60-hour week, 70-hour week, and then burn out. They would rather you be healthy and on top of everything, so that you're mentally ready for the next day and not just work 24/7.
Do you think that was that the case before coronavirus as well?
Yeah, so I met with the partner soon after joining, who leads our advanced analytics and intelligent automation group, and he basically said, look, we don't want you to come in here and feel like you need to have 70 hours worked. Like, do your 40 hours. If you don't want to go into the office, like assuming your client doesn't require it, you don't have to. Like, do what makes you the most productive, do what makes you feel like you're accomplishing what you want to at work. But by no means are you going to be penalized because you're not putting in like a 50-hour week.
And because you have, Alex, a client and supervisor within Guidehouse, how are you evaluated on your work and your success?
Yeah, so Guidehouse is set up so that there's verticals for sort of the different domains, and then there's one horizontal, which is the analytics group. So I'm evaluated by analytics, and each now it's like semi-annual, but basically every year you'll be reviewed by an analytics manager who's on your project, as well as anyone can submit feedback. So typically the account team, so that would be for me, like national security segment, like managers could weigh in on that review. I'm not sure how client feedback officially comes into the process because I haven't been through that yet. But I presume it's sort of just from the members of your team, both analytics and the account will weigh in on like, oh, the client likes this, or they want to see more of this.
Well, and hopefully they're doing that on a regular basis, right? I mean, you shouldn't, as an employee, be finding out months later that the client had a problem with any of your work, right?
Right. And part of that is just open communication, I think, with the client. So I meet with my client at least once a week to go over what I'm doing. And because I am a small, or the analytics team has been either one or two people on my specific project. So for a while, it's been just me. And so to make sure that I'm like matching the goals and expectations, I meet with my client regularly and have been communicating to say, okay, here's what I'm working on. And because she's focused on the day-to-day, can't necessarily check in all the time to say, okay, like, how's this or that? So she like trusts me a lot with that independence that I'm working towards her goals, basically.
Well, I do want to follow up with both of you on that interpersonal communications, electronic communications, especially right now where so many people are working remotely. But we do have another question who came in from a student. So this is students' time. So let me read this to you. Can you talk about how UVA helped you with your job search? Specifically, what resources did the School of Data Science provide to help find jobs and prepare you for technical interviews? And feel free to talk about UVA Career Center as well, the General Career Center if they were involved, or the ECA.
Yeah, I think a lot of it came with sending leads, especially where we had alumni connections. So for example, like Procter & Gamble, there were several alumni who worked there. And I think they held like 3 or 4 information sessions specific to the School of Data Science of recent alumni, which was great because I got to talk to someone who went through that interviewing process and just like was now employed by them. And so could kind of very much walk us through what that was like and then apply that to other like general fields. I would say the main thing with the School of Data Science is that they give us exposure to a lot of different kinds of work, be it consulting, be it, working for a company in-house, be it working for government, a whole bunch of different areas of exposure. And I think that was one of the best things that helped with jobs because A, I knew what was out there, and then B, they were able to help me kind of tailor my needs and interests. They did have 2 career treks, one to New York and one to San Francisco. I did not attend either of those, but the students who did thought it was very beneficial. I know, standard resume reviews, technical interview prep. I think all of that was really helpful. They would often bring in alumni or other speakers or even members of their board to kind of talk to students and help them with interview prep, especially with the technical interviews. And then they also compiled a lot of resources in terms of, hey, where do I look to practice these kind of things?
Thank you. Yeah, Alex?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everything that Bradley said, I would echo. The one other thing is, and I'm not sure if they still offer it because the coursework is changing pretty quickly as the program. I mean, it's what, in its 7th year, I think now. It's still young. It's still evolving. But we had a course where they would bring in an employer basically starting, it was in the springtime, I would say probably starting in the 2nd month. Okay, yeah, you're nodding your head. So I'm assuming they had it. So they'd bring in an employer to give a brief, and then they would also say after like they gave their presentation, the class was 50 minutes right before lunch. They would all say, okay, who wants to go to the Colonnade Club? And anyone who's interested in learning more or networking with that employer could just go to get lunch there. And so that's definitely a great opportunity. I put off my search a little longer than I probably should have. And so didn't take advantage of that as much as I should have, but that's definitely on top of everything else. If you have those opportunities to meet in small groups, I would definitely take advantage of those.
And did either of you go through on-grounds interviewing that the Career Center sets up? Neither one of you found your positions other ways?
So I did. I ended up, like, the position I'm in now was not the one through on-grounds interviewing, but I did do on-grounds interviewing. So, I went to, I think the nice thing is I had the flexibility of going to both like the engineering career fair to meet with like a lot of, more technical, kind of roles, like, your Amazon, those kind of places. And then also like the general, like kind of, I don't know if it's arts and sciences or the other career fair that was there, the general big career fair. And so I did both of those, and I did some on-grounds interviewing. Fannie Mae, for example, was on-grounds interviewing. And so I went through that process, and I thought that was pretty helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And the career fairs, I would say that when you're talking about like where to find jobs for entry level, not necessarily with advanced degrees, I would say the majority of companies at the career fair are looking for undergraduates. And I had a similar issue, like Bradley mentioned, where I was like, oh, it would be great if I could get this position. Seems like it matches up with what I'm interested in. And they're like, nope, only for undergrad. So there's definitely some slots where they know what they're looking for and they want to build you up. So definitely like seek those out if you're interested in getting a flavor of data science and don't necessarily have that huge like technical tool set already.
Yeah, and actually next week, next Thursday, is our fall job fair. We split it into 3 parts this year, and next week is the final part, which is the general job fair. Okay, great. I don't see anything else coming in from students. Chloe, do you have any other questions? I know we do have quite a list.
Yeah, I guess my last question would just be like talking about career fairs. If you had any advice to students about networking, either at career fairs or elsewhere, and how that may have helped you guys with your job search.
Yeah, I think the number one thing to say is leverage alumni. Kind of from my job search, the number of people who I talked to who went through the data science program or econ, and I was able to talk with them and get advice about the field, about interviewing, about all that kind of stuff. And now, like on my side, I would say probably at least once a week or once every other week, I'm talking to someone who's interested in the field that I'm either interested in working in the Fed or explicitly not interested in working at the Fed, but also just kind of wanted to hear what my job search was like and what advice I had. Because, a lot of us who ended up at our jobs, we applied to other places too. We went through this experience. So I would say reaching out to alumni and talking with them, the majority of them are incredibly happy and excited to, hear from you and to work with you. There's a reason that Alex and I took time out of our days to be here. And we love doing this. We love talking with you guys and learning about what you're interested in, as well as someone who's interested in the field. So I would say reach out to people, have those conversations, do those informational interviews, and it'll really pay off.
Yeah, and definitely don't limit yourself by what's listed on a job like description. That's something that I learned as I sort of went through the process. Like I wouldn't necessarily go and talk to someone if it didn't match 100% what I thought I already knew. If it was like, oh, well, it requires 2 years experience and this like algorithm or something that they're like, oh, we want for whatever reason that really specific one, and I didn't know it. Oftentimes those like job requirements are not made by data scientists. They sort of just say, here's all these skills that you need, and also it would be great if you had 2 years. If you think that you would be a good fit and it matches somewhat to what you think you have, like definitely reach out to those people, because chances are, like in my position right now, I'm not using absolutely everything that I learned in school, and I'm definitely not using everything that they listed on the job rec. So it's possible that you may be a better fit than you give yourself credit for. So definitely don't discount yourself when you're debating about what either if it's applying or just reaching out to an alum. If it's for alumni, we're definitely going to be willing to help you. And if it's for a rec, you never know, you might get through the like filter, even if you don't have everything that's listed there.
The one other quick point I want to interject is when I was applying, when a lot of my friends were applying for jobs, one thing they would do is kind of just mass submit resumes through a handshake without like cover letters or anything. And I think that, you know, that's kind of, I mean, it's a strategy, right? It's throwing a net into the ocean and hoping you catch something. I think though that, while it's definitely important to do that, to apply to a wide variety of things, putting in the time and effort to learn something about the company and help make yourself stand out in your cover letter or in an email interaction will go a long way to show that, hey, you're a candidate who has the skills, but is also interested in the company enough to put in that little startup cost.
And just to build on the net analogy a little bit more, I would say cast a wide but intentional net. Look for what you want. Don't apply to things you don't want. It's pretty simple. Like, you're not going to be happy at a job, even if you can get it, that you don't want. And at the end of the day, if you're not happy at your job, it's a track you don't want to go down. So definitely like look for things that match what you're looking for. And well, yeah, sorry, that was kind of self-evident, but you know what I'm saying? Don't look to apply to absolutely everything just so you can get a job. Make sure that you're intentional about what you're looking for. And even if you do, like I got my job from LinkedIn Easy Apply. So I did not necessarily get, for the ones that I super like specifically targeted, it doesn't always work. And sometimes that wide net will work, but make sure that it matches, if you're going to do that, what you're looking for.
All right, thank you so much for that closing advice. I think that's a great note to wrap up on. Thank you guys for joining us today. We definitely learned a lot, and thank you to all of our students for being here and for your great questions. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And so Bradley and Alex are offering office hours after. For students who signed up, you guys can access their Zoom links on the Google Sheet that I sent you, and I'll also link it again down below. But that's all from us. Thank you, and have a great day.